Hi everyone, welcome to Technium's end-to-end webinar series. Today we have Email Hacking and Financial Fraud, a webinar by LMG Security. My name is Tamara and I am your moderator for today. Our presenter for the webinar today is Sherri Davidoff. Sherri Davidoff is the CEO of LMG Security and the author of 3 books, including Ransomware and Cyber Extortion and Data Breaches, Crisis and Opportunity. As a recognized expert in cybersecurity, she has been called a, quote, security badass by the New York Times. Sherri is a GIAC certified forensic analyst and penetration tester and received her degree in computer science and electrical engineering from MIT. Sherri, I'm passing you control of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Tamara. And big thanks to Technium for hosting us and for organizing this webinar series. Really appreciate it. A lot of valuable information. Okay, today we're going to dig into email hacking and financial fraud. We're going to talk about cyber criminal Ray Hushpuppi and what happened to him, go through some of the pictures that were in the indictment and some of the details. Then we'll talk about how criminals monetize your email, email spoofing techniques, how we can train our users, and then we're going to walk through a sting operation in LMG's laboratory where we actually show you what the hackers are doing in action and how you can protect yourself and your organization. I also just wanted to mention we have a new book out by myself, and there's my 2 co-authors. We have been celebrating. And with that, we are also launching a new ransomware response class. I'm very pleased to announce that the Technium community gets a 10% discount if you use the code. So check that out. It's also on one of the closing slides as well. Hope to see some of you there. All right, so for those of you who follow the news in cybersecurity, during the fall, we had a pretty big cyber criminal bust. Ray Hushpuppi, who conspired to launder over $300 million, was actually indicted and sentenced to 135 months in prison. He also has to pay $1.7 million in restitution to his victims. So he was operating around the world and just sucking money away from victims using email hacking as the basis for that. So we don't hear about email hacking nearly as often as we see ransomware in the news, for example. But according to the FBI's statistics, it is the #1 cause of cash loss. As you can see, it caused over $2.3 billion in cash loss during the past year. So that's very significant. Now, what is business email compromise? Just to back up for a second, it's where criminals are stealing your money using email as a vehicle for doing that. So typically they're hacking your email or somebody's email. They're monitoring conversations and they're finding a way to jump in the middle and redirect financial transactions. Often they're targeting someone in your finance department or somebody who handles the money, or occasionally just random employees that may be able to do things like buy gift cards, for example. But the idea is that they're going to have a really good understanding of who's who and what conversations are going on, and then they try to redirect the funds. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, business email compromise has cost us over $43 billion in the past decade. So again, huge amount of money getting siphoned into this. And that's part of why we're seeing criminals becoming more and more sophisticated. They're able to invest in their processes. They're able to hire other criminals in order to do the dirty work and actually move money around and cash out. There were some really good statistics by Beasley, the cyber insurance company. They show that business email compromise, and fraudulent instruction is on the rise. Fraudulent instruction is often a piece of business email compromise where they're directing victims to take certain actions. So you can see that's been going up year after year. All right, let's look at a case study. This is Ray Hushpuppi, and you can see him in the indictment. They actually show pictures from his social media where he shows himself with like Gucci and Louis Vuitton handbags and accessories and things like that. So here's one of the cases that they stepped through. He targeted a law firm. The law firm was managing a trust account on behalf of one of their clients. And they ended up transferring over $922,000 into the account controlled by Ray Hushpuppi and his associates. So what happened was they were representing a client who was refinancing a property with Citizens Bank. And the paralegal who was helping to do this sent a verification email to what ended up being a scam address. It looked like a Citizens Bank address, but it wasn't. It was actually the scammers. often this type of thing happens when criminals have access to somebody's email account, can see that there's a transaction in the works, and then they'll again jump in with a fake email that looks like it's coming from your bank, but actually isn't. And so it's really important for your employees to know exactly what to look for. Again, in this case, we have a paralegal, didn't notice that there was a misspelling or something along those lines, sent some verification information to a fake Citizens Bank address. And then the law firm actually had a policy to prevent financial loss. They had to confirm via fax and then a follow-up phone call. So you would think that this would stop the money from going out the door, but the paralegal followed the process, and they sent the email, received a fax in response, and then called the number that was listed on the fax. Whoops. And unfortunately, this happens all the time where people will get an email and they'll call the number on the email to verify, or you get a fax and you call the number on the fax. And of course, that number goes right back to the criminals. There's Ray Hushpuppy with his Louis Vuitton bag. So as a result, $922,000 went out the door, and unfortunately it wasn't discovered until much later, weeks later. If you catch that right away, within hours or maybe a couple days, you might be able to get some or all of the money back, but by the time a couple weeks goes by, usually that money is out the door. So in this case, no funds were recovered. That is a giant loss. And this, unfortunately, is not unusual. And we need to think about what professional services companies were using when we're looking at third-party suppliers and the types of data that they store on our behalf or that they have access to. According to Beasley, professional services and associations are actually the #1 most commonly targeted industry when it comes to business email compromise and fraudulent instructions. So they're looking for your attorneys, they're looking for your paralegals and for your accountants. So just something to think about, who has access to your sensitive data, to your money, to your bank accounts, and what happens if they're targeted by criminals. Okay, one reason why criminals are so successful is because it is very, very easy these days to break into email accounts. This is not rocket science, you guys. According to researchers, there are at least 24 billion credentials, email addresses, and passwords that are circulating on the dark web that researchers have actually found. And that's probably just the tip of the iceberg, because there are plenty of dark web forums where criminals exchange sensitive information where it is not visible to researchers or security professionals. On the right-hand side, you can actually see a listing for US Gmail accounts for sale, aged and fresh Gmail accounts. Make sure to change the password and recovery email after purchase. So they're just reminding whatever criminal purchases these emails that they should lock out the original user by changing the password and the recovery email. Nice. So why do hackers want into your email? Of course, they can make money off of it. And let's talk about some of the ways that they can make money. First of all, your email is the keys to the kingdom. Often before I give this talk, somebody will come up to me and say, nobody wants access to my email. I don't have anything interesting in there. Unfortunately, yes, you do. And your email can be used to unlock most, if not all, of the other accounts that you have, e-commerce, banking, in some cases, social media, and more. Also, they can send malicious emails to your contacts. I'm sure everybody on this webinar has gotten an email from someone saying, my email was hacked. Ignore that message that I just sent. They can also just sell your password on the dark web. And that's a trend we're seeing with initial access brokers, where there's a specialized type of criminal. All they do day in and day out is get initial access, and they sell it to other criminals who will do other stuff. So very specialized. And then finally, they can sift through your email and steal data. Sometimes financial information, personal information that they can resell, but there's other stuff that is directly worth money in your email. And that's why I like on the screenshot you see here, this is an Amazon gift card checker that our team found on the dark web. So this is a tool that criminals use. They can go through your email, get gift card numbers, and then automatically, they'll feed in a ton of gift card numbers, and it'll automatically check and tell them the balance on each of those gift cards, so they don't have to do it manually. Very convenient. But none of these are the ways that hackers make big money, right? How do hackers actually make their big money? That's where business email compromise scams really come into play. The way that they make the highest dollar amount is through invoice fraud. And even though this is a report from Microsoft, the Digital Defense Report 2022, highly recommend it. It is a great read. Invoice fraud only counts for 9.3% of scams, but it is the highest dollar loss of any type of scam. So we're going to walk through a couple examples shortly. Then there's the BEC lure. I'm actually not sure I agree with how Microsoft has categorized these, because the BEC lure encompasses a ton of stuff. The idea is that the criminal will have a conversation with the potential victim, try to establish rapport, suss them out, really understand how they could potentially manipulate them into getting some money. They might look in their email for information about upcoming transactions or things like that. And ultimately, the goal is to create some kind of monetary transfer. Then we also have business information theft, where they just steal information. Payroll redirect, again, I'll show you some examples of that. And then gift card scams. Although you hear a lot about gift card scams in the news, they actually only make up about 1.9% of all types of business email compromise scams. They just tend to be consumer facing, and so you do hear about it more. All right, so here's one example of a BEC lure. It might be something very simple. This is one that one of my team members got. Looked like it came from me, the CEO, and it said, "Hi Sam, do you have some free moment?" Okay, that's a red flag. "I'll need you to get something done for me real quick, sent from my mobile device," right? So then the employee might respond, start engaging in a conversation, and the criminal would again try to extract some kind of financial payment. We're seeing a ton of these payroll redirects, where often it looks like an employee emails HR and says something like, "I've recently changed banks. Can you update my payroll direct deposit information? The previous account will be inactive a few days before the next payday." And often they have real forms filled out. Like if they had access to anybody's email, they found a direct deposit form, the criminals might fill that out and send it to HR to actually change the place where the employee's paycheck is deposited. So that happens all the time. And here's a nice chart from Proofpoint showing the frequency of payroll redirect scams. And as you can see, there's often a spike a couple times a month, a few days before standard paydays, because that's when the criminals are putting through requests to redirect that payroll shortly before the next payroll happens, and then they want to make off with the cash. So here's one case study. This is a real case that LMG handled. We had a religious institution. Their finance clerk got phished. So click on a link in a phishing email and her password got stolen. The attacker then logged into her email and realized that this was the finance clerk and she had administrative access to the payroll system. So then the attacker reused those same credentials. Again, often people will use the same password for their work email as other cloud systems that they have, and then managed to change payroll for 30 employees. So they got really lucky. There was actually a typo in the way that the attacker changed things. So as a result, the bank flagged that transaction. The payroll was not deposited, thank goodness. But if it had been, they would have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So fortunately, they were able to delay that. They reran the payroll. It did cause a little hiccup, but they didn't actually lose a ton of money. And by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those into the Q&A chat. Happy to take some questions. We'll also have a little time for Q&A at the end. All right, this is a gift card scam. I love this. This happened to me. Well, really, it happened to the head of our penetration testing team, Tom Pohl. So I was standing next to him at the time, and he said, "I just got a text from you." And I was like, "What is that? That's not from me." So the criminal said, "Hi, Tom. I have an urgent task for you now. Let me know if you got my text. Thanks. Sherri Davidoff, founder and CEO, LMG Security." And this is a trend. Like, first of all, what person needs to put a signature on their text messages, right? That should be a red flag for your employees. Feel free to use this for training purposes, by the way. Anyway, he responded because I was like, "Go ahead, respond." Don't do this, by the way. It does set you up for future conversations with criminals, but it was for research purposes in this case. So he said, "Hey, Sherri, what do you need? I'm always glad to help." And the criminal said, "Thanks for answering. I'm on a conference call meeting right now, and I need to provide a client with some cards." So first of all, I love this because the criminal knew what I do. The criminal knew I was a consultant, that I have clients, probably knew that Tom was the head of our penetration testing team. So then the criminal says, "How long will it take for you to get to the nearest store?" And Tom, always joking, says, "What kind of cards? I'm just a block away from Hallmark." Then the criminal says, "Okay, perfect. Can you confirm if you can get Apple cards from the nearest store to you?" And then Tom sends him a picture of a greeting card that has apples on it. And the criminal says, "Funny, but you're playing with your job." And I think that's actually really telling because often you talk to employees afterwards, after there's been a cash loss, and you ask them, "Why did you do this?" Because they'll say, like, "I felt like something was off. There was like a little alarm bell in my head." And it's because they're getting this pressure. You know, they're getting pressure from the criminals. There's some psychological tactics. You're playing with your job, things like that, and they don't want to disappoint the boss. So again, really important to show examples like this to your employees so that they understand the kinds of tactics that criminals will implement. Okay, this is a great case. Fake invoice scams have been very popular the past few years, and we see this is again that the number one highest dollar amount of any of these scams in terms of cash loss. So there was a man who ended up pleading guilty to stealing money from Facebook and Google, and really he was just sending random invoices to these companies and they would process them. So don't get any ideas. He did get brought to justice, but he ended up stealing almost $100 million, which is kind of amazing and shows you like it's really important to have those checks in place within your finance teams. How do you identify fake emails, things like that? We're seeing a new trend impersonating attorneys. Attorneys often send big bills to their clients. Here's one example of a fake invoice from a law firm, Clifford Chance, not really from the law firm, of course. Legal professional services, the bill is $44.8, or sorry, not $44.8, $44,000. And then the employees follow up and the criminals follow up with them. So the criminal says, "Please find attached the invoice." Oh, sorry, the finance team says, "Please find attached the invoice received from Claire Freeman of Clifford Chance. We don't know what it's in relation to and she's asking for payment." So this is sent to an employee at the company. Remember, if a criminal has access to that email, then they can choose to respond. And that's what happened in this case. "Regarding Clifford Chance, I ordered the services. The invoice is for freelance research carried out last year. There was no official contract nor PO. Kindly process invoice for payment." So, oh yeah, ignore the fact that there's no paper trail. As long as it's coming from my email, it's fine, right? So unfortunately, again, these types of things are getting paid out all the time. We also see business information theft, and often this is just a stepping stone to more fraud. So one common thing is for the attacker to email someone in finance and say like this, "I need you to email me the aging report from accounts receivable and include the customer payable contact information." So why would they want this? They want to know who owes you money and what their email addresses are. And so the next thing they're going to do is they're going to send an email to all of your customers on that list pretending to be from you. "Hi, my name is Sue. I'm going to change the location where you should be making your payments." And that's the next step for the criminals. They're going to target your customers. And I guarantee you, once your customers have paid your invoice once, they are not going to want to pay it again to you. So a lot of times you may have a hard time collecting. Okay, so how are the criminals actually tricking people? Well, one way is through homoglyphs. Again, this is from the Microsoft Digital Defense Report, which I highly recommend. Homoglyphs are letters that look like other letters. And so if you change the spelling of an email, sometimes if someone is just taking a quick glance, then they won't notice that you've substituted an L for an I. 25% of the time, when we see fake domains, they're showing that particular homoglyph technique, substituting an L for an I, or maybe that's an L for an I. We also see substituting lowercase i's for L's, substituting Q for G 7% of the time, and you can look down the rest of this list. Here's a few examples. CEO at Indeed, you can barely tell that that's incorrect. Sometimes we actually see the top level domain changed as well. And then here's, again, a homoglyph. They've replaced the D with a CL. So again, if somebody's not looking too carefully, they might not notice. Really important to teach your users about this, and also to show them that the email, the from address, is like the return address on a letter. When I was in college, I used to, at MIT, I used to play games with some of my other computer science nerd friends, and we would fake emails from each other using open mail relays. And it was actually really good education in how easy it is to fake emails from people. So again, it's just like the return address on a letter. Anybody can really write whatever they want. And here's an example from November of this year. Somebody sent an email saying, I need to change or modify my direct deposit information to be effective for the next pay date. It looks like it's coming from John Doe, but the email address is just incorrect. If you want to detect these, you can actually check out the reply to header. If you go to reply to that message and it goes someplace completely different, not to the real person, that's why that's a good red flag that it's fake, because the criminals want to get the reply, but they don't actually have access to the email address that they're trying to spoof. So good way to detect those. You don't actually want to reply. Here's another one where they might fake just the from name, but the email address is, in this case, from Russia. And these are easier to detect. Your employees should, your team members should be noticing them, of course. But again, everybody has to double check the actual email that it's coming from. So here are some tips for all your team members on how to spot a fraudulent email. Make sure the sender address is correct. If it's not, that's a red flag. Look for those homoglyphs, things that are unusual or don't seem right. If the reply to address is different from the sender address, that can also be a red flag as well in certain cases. Also, usually the attackers will put in some sense of urgency. I need your help now, or your account will be disabled if you don't respond within an hour. If the sender's only available by email, hey, this is the CEO, I'm in a meeting, I can't take a call, can you please get me gift cards? That's a red flag. And if there's a request for money or financial related information, you always want to make sure everybody gives that some extra scrutiny. So how can we make sure that actually happens? Cybersecurity awareness training is key. I'm a huge fan of on-demand training. I love, by the way, Technium, that you guys are recording this and making it available on demand afterwards. I hope you guys get some value out of that. But when it comes to general security awareness training, it's nice to take it in bite-sized chunks, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Make sure people get email reminders. Security needs to be top of mind these days for everyone. It is not enough to have a single annual webinar. This is a chart by KnowBe4. It shows that the majority of organizations these days are doing cybersecurity awareness training monthly or sometimes even twice a month. And that is really the best way to make sure that it's effective and that it stays on people's radar. You also want to include phishing exercises. I really like the KnowBe4 system. At LMG, we deploy it for our clients. And I like that you can do randomized phishing. People can report phishing. There's like a little report phishing button in Outlook, and the system can learn from the phishing emails that are reported so that your phishing tests are more and more accurate. You'll also want to include multi-factor authentication, social engineering. I know that's a mouthful. We will come back to that in a few minutes, but basically you want to make sure that your training is up to date with the latest threats and trends. There was recently a report out by IBM that showed the cost of a data breach decreases on average by $250,000 per incident if employees have effective cybersecurity awareness training. So that's good ROI. All right, what should employees do if they get an email with updated bank account information, requests for financial information? You want to make sure everybody is trained to verify using some second form of communication, whether it's phone, Zoom, face-to-face, and they should not use information in the email itself. Do not call a number from the email that you're trying to verify. That's really important, and that's where we tend to see a lot of the errors occurring. All right, let's jump into our sting operation. Personally, I like to see real hackers at work so that I can monitor what they are actually doing. And so this is an operation that we set up in our laboratory at LMG. HackMe Inc. is a company that manufactures widgets. They have a billing clerk named Sue Septible, and they have a CFO named Victor Tim. They do business with a cleaning company called Squeaky Cleanup that has an account coordinator. I did not set this up, but the account coordinator's name is Dusty Teppich, which I think means vacuum in German, so nice little detail. All right, so here's Sue. Sue is a new finance clerk, and in LMG's lab, we have seeded her account with all kinds of juicy information that a hacker would want. You can see employee withholding information, W-4s, usernames, passwords, all kinds of other good stuff that they might want to go after. So let's see if and how the attackers break into Sue's account. First of all, let's find an evil website for Sue to visit. Behind the scenes, we like to use the website OpenFish. OpenFish keeps track of phishing trends. You can check it out yourself. As you can see, it tells you the brands that are being targeted, the number of phishing campaigns that they're seeing. So we use this to pick a live website that is actively exploiting users. Now, make sure it's important to be aware that phishing sites do not last long. Often those URLs are changing within a matter of hours. So here's one example where we clicked on it, we got a user hacked, and then just a few hours later, it was already marked as deceptive by Google Chrome. On average, phishing campaigns take 24 hours to fully execute for criminals. One of the monkey wrenches that hackers are throwing into the mix is that they're using legitimate cloud services. So here's an example where this website, csally.myportfolio.com, is actually hosted at a legitimate cloud provider's website, Adobe. So that makes it harder to detect, harder to block, and it means they're more likely to get away with their scams. All right, so Sue gets a link, and she chooses to click on it. This is a very common type of scam, a document being shared through SharePoint. She clicks on the Document Center link, and it tells her to sign in. So she signs in, and you'll notice it actually says your connection is secure. We're going to dig into that in a few minutes. More and more often, we are actually seeing correctly signed SSL certificates as part of these scams. So that's a really important thing that you all should be aware of, and all of the team members at your company should be aware of as well. So Sue goes to sign in, and she gets hacked pretty quickly. On average, the median time for hackers to break into and access your private data after you click on a phishing link is 1 hour and 12 minutes. And that's pretty much spot on based on what we see in our lab. Often it's just a few minutes, sometimes it's a couple hours. Typically it's within that range. There was another report out earlier this fall that said that most hackers need 5 hours or less to break into enterprise environments. Again, I can tell you, talking to our pen test team, it's rare for them to not break in on day one, and often they have a full network takeover within just a few days. And then you can correct it and remediate it, so it's not always a bad thing. Okay, so within an hour, the hackers log in, and they've broken into Sue's account. She clicks on that link, and then boom, they log in, and it's not us. You can tell because it was a Mac system, it was Chrome, it was from a totally different IP address. So right away, we're all excited. Where are they coming from? Albuquerque, US. Often they're tunneling through systems in the United States if they're not actually located there. And then what did the hackers do? Interestingly, they searched for an invoice, which was great because we had planted an invoice in the system. So they're going to try to commit invoice fraud. And they found our invoice. So what they do next is what they did next was set up a mail forwarding rule. So they found the invoice, and then they were like, cool, we want to get more information and monitor this conversation. So they started forwarding all of Sue's emails, our finance clerk, all of her emails to gert.frobe@mail.com. Who is Gert Frobe? Gert Frobe is an actor, a German actor from the 1940s who played Nazis in movies. So great. Any email that contains the words invoice, payment, wire, transfer, or personal, all of that gets sent out to the attacker, and then it stops. So as soon as the attacker starts doing that, again, your confidential data is already going out the door, and you can't put the genie back in that bottle. Now, it is possible to detect this, of course, when it occurs. What we're looking at here is the Microsoft Security and Compliance Center. You could see, for example, activity from an infrequent country in this case, or sometimes impossible travel alerts. One of the challenges is that since COVID, these types of alerts have been deprioritized with so many people working remotely, so many people working from home. So it used to be much more of a red flag when you had somebody logging in remotely or from someplace they aren't normally logging in from. Now, you can absolutely configure this to alert your staff anyway, and that's why it's so important to go in, configure your systems, make sure you're actually getting alerts when you expect to get them, and that they're actively sending messages to your staff. Here are a few examples of the types of activities we can alert on. Everything from a risky sign-on to suspicious inbox forwarding, that would have helped in this case. Activity performed by an employee that has been terminated. So these are important. You can change the severity levels and again, make sure that somebody is getting a text or an email. Again, it's really important to conduct those cloud configuration reviews and also to conduct them routinely. I would recommend at least annually because things change. Microsoft is constantly changing their best practices. Threats are constantly changing. You just find over time that the configuration of your environment decays if you do nothing. So it's really important just to check it and keep up with it. And pay attention to notifications. Interestingly, we got this alert, by the time we got this alert, it was already 2 hours after the forwarding rule had been in effect. And by then, the attacker had already received a bunch of emails. So you should just keep in mind, number one, the faster you're able to react to this, the less information will walk out the door, of course. But also, you want to make sure that you're responding as quickly as possible and that you're getting alerts in the time frame that you expect. And then the really bad stuff started to happen. So the attackers ended up syncing the whole mailbox to their computers. This is important because number one, they don't have to search for stuff anymore using the web interface. So we can no longer track and say they're looking for an invoice, they're looking for an ACH. They've just literally downloaded everything and now they can sift through it at their leisure. And when it comes to investigations, if you think that your email has been hacked, often there's a reason to do an investigation and determine if there might be a data breach. Once this happens and the attacker syncs their mailbox, it is game over. And often you have, at that point, you're just stuck doing an inventory and doing notifications. This is how over notifications happen, frankly, because a lot of times, from that point on, even if the attackers aren't using all of that data, they've got it and it's walked out the door. Okay, so the additional data that comes from business email compromise happens because of the cost of a data breach. So number one, you have to worry about the cash loss, any scams that have occurred, but then also, again, just the fact that a criminal has access to your email means that they could have stolen and misused sensitive information in there. And most of us have far more information in our email than we even realize. Raise your hand if you have more than 4 or 5 years of emails in your company's inboxes. Okay, that was like a good opportunity to stretch everybody. And there might be a few of you out there that have shorter retention policies, which is great, but most of us are using email as a file cabinet, and that means if there's even one spreadsheet from 5 years ago that has a bunch of social security numbers, you have a data breach on your hands. Business email compromise is one of the most costly and expensive types of data breaches. On average, it costs $4.89 per record. Again, imagine if you have 1,000 or 10,000 records in there, that really adds up. One of the quickest and cheapest ways you can reduce your risk is to reduce your data. It makes sense. The more oil you have when it spills, the bigger the oil leak, right? Same thing with data. Data is hazardous material, and the more data you are collecting, then the bigger a problem you have if it goes out the door. So consider, honestly, one of the best ways to improve your security fast and cheaply is by reducing the information you're storing, especially in places like email, where it's just one password away from every hacker on the internet. Store less and delete more. Okay, let's go. We have a little bonus case study for you guys today. We have one more case in the lab where Sue gets phished again. And I just had to include this because it was kind of fun. So Sue clicks on a link. Again, I want to dig into this for a second. When she clicks, it is a properly SSL encrypted site. We didn't used to see this 3 or 4 years ago, or at least not very often. So your team members might be looking for the lock icon. Oh, they're seeing the lock icon. It's secure. Not really. You can see that that email address is really long and weird. This is a hacker's website. So what's going on? This is a certificate provided by Cloudflare. It looks, again, if you click on it, like that connection is secure, but unfortunately, it's very easy to buy SSL certificates these days. Check out this advertisement from Namecheap. No paperwork, $5.99 per year. Positive SSL, one of the most popular and inexpensive SSL certificates in the industry. This hassle-free cert is an ideal entry-level solution. So hackers are actually really taking the time to purchase some of these. It's like Oprah, you get a cert, and you get a cert, and you get a cert, and then you end up with situations like this that are really hard for end users to tell. It's really hard for end users to tell that these are not legitimate websites. So this data is encrypted. So when Sue goes to type her password into this fake site, or even to Microsoft's real site, it's encrypted. But in this case, the attacker has jumped in the middle. So you have a secure connection with the attacker, and the attacker will collect that password. And then the attacker turns around and sends that password to Microsoft or whatever it is that they're trying to intercept. And then Microsoft sends information back, the attacker gets that information back and sends it back to the user. So really this is called an SSL man-in-the-middle attack where there is a secure and encrypted connection, but they are sitting on one end of that. If anybody has any questions, let me know. You can message me on LinkedIn or we can talk a little bit afterwards. All right, so we have this secure website that is designed to collect Sue Septible's email address and password. It says she's received a secure file. And the first time you type a password in, it will say, incorrect password, please try again. This is a common configuration of phishing websites that should be a red flag for you and your team members. What are the hackers trying to do? They're trying to collect more than one password from you. So even if that first password is correct, they will say, wrong password, please try again. In this case, the website is coded. So here's where the credentials are really going in this case. In this case, the website is coded to do 2 retries or 2 incorrect password attempts, but the hacker could collect 3, 4, 5 different passwords. We certainly see that in our laboratory. All right, so they've collected Sue's password, and then less than an hour later, they log in from the Netherlands. I don't know what it is with the Netherlands, but we have been seeing that quite a bit lately. So they log in, and what do? Well, first of all, actually, I want to pause for a second and remind everybody that multi-factor authentication would have stopped this from happening. Yes, that's right. How many of you are using MFA in your email or for your email? And then how many of you are using it consistently? Unfortunately, often it's a CEO or an executive or 1 or 2 people that have MFA taken off for some reason, and as a result, you end up with a business email compromise case. Also, these days, the way you configure multi-factor authentication really matters. We are seeing a ton of MFA fatigue attacks. In fact, I have a whole case study on that in our Beyond Passwords webinar. But here's what's going on. You can see in this chat here, this is a screenshot from the same hackers that hacked Uber. And they actually explained their strategies. They said, sign in with a password. It will issue multi-factor authentication through a phone call or an authentication app, so you might get a pop-up. However, no limit is placed on the amount of calls that can be made. So if you call the employee 100 times at 1 a.m. while he's trying to sleep, he will more than likely accept it. So these are called MFA bombing or MFA fatigue attacks, where over and over and over, they will try to get the user to approve a sign-on. And unfortunately, sooner or later, the user often agrees to that. We just saw it at LMG again in one of our penetration tests where it actually only took a couple attempts, and then the user said, okay, that's fine. I'm just going to say yes, and we were in. Now, in this case, there was a second user in the tenant, Vic Timms, the CFO, and Vic Timms had multi-factor authentication. Vic also clicked on a link in a phishing email, and Vic was not hacked. So good example of how multi-factor authentication really helps. We did see a sign-in request, and you can see it on the screen here, approved sign-in, and we did not click accept. And as a result, the attackers did not break into Vic's account. Now, we are kind of wondering if they're going to launch an MFA fatigue attack. We'll find out. Stay tuned. There are now, Microsoft has actually rolled out some preventative measures that can prevent MFA fatigue attacks, things like limiting the number of requests that can be made, for example, number matching, putting these things in context. So take a peek. In fact, I think we had some news out from Microsoft recently that some of these will be default going forward. All right, so the attackers have been searching Sue's account now that they're in. They search for things like ACH, payroll, again, Dusty Tepic, one of the vendors. Yay. And there were alerts. We see this all the time in business email compromise cases where there's alerts, but nobody's monitoring them. In this case, the alerts were activity from an infrequent country. So again, make sure you've got your configuration down, you're checking fairly regularly. What did the attackers do next? They started going after our files. This was interesting. They found all the sensitive information that we had planted in there, passports, you name it. And then they also reviewed attachments. I thought you guys might be interested in seeing this. What you're looking at is a mailbox attachment dumper that was taken from the dark web. So this it will go through someone's email and dump out all the attachments so the hackers don't have to go through message by message. Yeah, so hacker tools are really prolific on the dark web, and the attackers are using this to their advantage to automate these types of attacks. The next thing they did was they redirected mail to the archive folder. Again, another common tactic. So we have a follow-up message from Dusty Tepic. Instead of redirecting message out to Gert Frobe, they just don't want the user to see it. They don't want susceptible to see it. So the vendor sends a follow-up and says, hey, I didn't hear back from you regarding the invoice. They don't want Sue to see it, but the attackers want to see it themselves. So they're going to check your archive folder for you to see if there's any interesting emails in there that would help them or that they could leverage. So, and here's, if you're curious, here's the configuration. These redirects are so key. They're like the canary in the coal mine. Definitely a good thing to get alerts on. Okay, so this is actively in our laboratory. We are waiting with bated breath. What we expect to see is an email from, so we have the real invoice. This was from a different case that we did. The attacker found a real invoice, and then they made a fake invoice with different bank information. So this is the way these types of scams tend to roll, where the attackers will sooner or later send a fake invoice with a different location where they want you to deposit the money, and then it's game over. So to recap, here's how criminals hack email and use it to profit. They will use stolen passwords to access email. That's why it is so important to use multi-factor authentication. They will search your email for invoices, wire transfers, really any kind of upcoming transaction. If they want, they'll steal data. They might just sync the invoice for convenience. They might add some mail forwarding rules. Again, these can be very dangerous, especially if you find out 6 months down the road that all of your mail has been forwarded. You really want to catch that quickly. Then if they want, they'll send fake invoices, fake wire transfer requests, and they will sit back and profit. All right, I got a question earlier. When someone else's email gets hacked, what should I do when I start getting emails from their hacked account? And again, probably everybody on this call has gotten a message similar to the one you see from my friend Brenda, which says, please do not open. That was not sent from me. I'm not sure what happened. One thing you absolutely should never do is correspond with the hackers, with the email from the hackers. Even if it came from your friend Brenda, do not say, I think you've been hacked. Because then the attackers, you're on their radar. They know your email is legit. They know that you're actively, monitoring this message from Brenda. So don't give them anything. Don't respond to any messages. If you really want to let your friend or your colleague know, you can call them, text them, let them know in some other way besides using their hacked email. And then what a lot of people don't think about is the fact that any emails you sent with them may well have been reviewed by an attacker or stolen. So if you get this, for example, from an attorney or from anyone else that you may have sent sensitive information with, your emails that you shared with them may have been stolen or accessed by an attacker. And so you have to treat it accordingly. So identify any sensitive information, sensitive conversations, financial information that was exchanged. Assume those have been hacked unless you hear otherwise. You might want to talk with IT, talk with your security team. If you are IT or you are security, you may want to chat with the person on the other end to get some more information and see if you can rule out a breach. All right, what do we do if we suspect an email hack? Well, first of all, you want to lock out the hackers. That means change passwords right away. Even if you're not 100% sure, you don't want to be playing with fire here. Change passwords sooner rather than later. Of course, enable multi-factor authentication if it's not already in place. And then don't forget to kill any active sessions. Otherwise, the attackers will still be in your system. You also want to preserve evidence. So I've popped up a box here for managing a litigation hold. You want to turn on that litigation hold so that the attacker can't just delete messages. This way you'll always know what they've been doing. And then activate your response procedures. You may want to report to cyber insurance. You may want to pull in an attorney if you think there's any sensitive information there. Just make sure that you're handling it properly. I actually just reviewed a cyber insurance policy last night that required reporting to the FBI and local law enforcement. So you really want to make sure that you understand what's in that policy and that your incident response procedures are aligned with it. And then if there's any hint of fraud, if you think there might have been money moved, you absolutely want to report that right away. The faster you report, the more likely you are to recover money. So start by reporting to the bank if there's been any kind of financial loss. Make sure you alert them right away. And then you might also want to report to the FBI. Here's a link to the Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3. You can file a complaint, and that can sometimes get you access to additional resources that are provided by the FBI. They can also sometimes help to recover funds more quickly as well if there's been a loss. All right, so that's about it. So a quick summary of how to defend yourself and your organization. Number one, use multi-factor authentication and use strong multi-factor authentication. Make sure you are protecting your email accounts because they are valuable. Number two, conduct a cloud configuration review. Make sure you have someone regularly reviewing your Microsoft tenant or whatever you use for email and file sharing to make sure that it's in line with best practices. Train your team. You want to do out-of-band verification. If there's any requests for financial transactions, you want to check emails carefully for signs of fraud, and you want all of your team members to know how to detect a phishing email. And finally, make sure you report fraud right away to the bank, potentially to law enforcement. Make sure you're aware of your cyber insurance coverage and any other requirements that you have. So with that, thank you so much. I'll take questions now. Really appreciate your time, and thanks again to Technium for setting this up. We do have a class. I put that discount code on the slide here as well, and it's good for the whole Technium community. So I will turn it back over to you, Tamara. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sherri. We did have a few questions that came from our audience during the presentation. First question is, how do I know if I am up to date on my best practices for Office 365?
Yeah, that's a good question because Microsoft best practices often change. We see the threat landscape changing, and so there's always new details to be aware of. We also see just new features being rolled out. You can look for the Center for Internet Security guidelines. Those are available, and they have a checklist. Some of it can be automated, but a lot of it is a manual process. There are also some other automated tools available from Microsoft and other providers as well. There's an open source tool too. And of course, you can have third parties like us at LMG doing configuration reviews as well, if that's easier for you. So if you want any links to those resources, again, feel free to drop me a line, and I'm happy to provide those.
Great, thank you. Second question was, what MFA should I be using?
Yes, that's a big question. So multi-factor authentication has really evolved. Unfortunately, it's necessary because so many passwords have been stolen. But some multi-factor authentication is stronger than others. For example, I can tell you what you don't want to use, if you can at all help it, are text messages. Text messages are very easy to intercept. They are not encrypted in transit. They are very phishing prone. It's easy for the criminals to steal them. Text messages are still better than nothing when it comes to multi-factor authentication, but we can do a lot better these days. Instead, take a look at using authenticator apps, especially if you configure them to have limitations on the number of prompts that can pop up. You want to make sure you're protecting against those MFA bombing attacks. And again, Microsoft has just rolled out number matching and some other additional protections as well. Hardware tokens are also very, very effective. Things like the YubiKey that you can use to physically plug into your computer or activate via Bluetooth or another physical method. So I'd say either hardware token or app is great. You want to try to avoid text messages and phone calls because the public switch telephone network is just not designed for security.
Thank you. And our last question was, how can I get people to actually stop clicking on phishing emails?
I wish I had the answer to that. I can tell you that I've seen clients of ours over the years dramatically reduce their phishing click rate. And typically that happens when they're doing regular phishing tests, which is why I love stuff like Know Before, where you can have those regular randomized clicking or phishing tests. And then if an employee fails, they automatically get sent for more training. So I think it's really important to be closing the loop. People who fail a phishing test should get more training so that they are better prepared to resist phishing attacks in the future. And it really needs to be a regular thing. It can't just be once a year.
Great. Thank you, Sherri. Once again, this is Tamara with LMG Security. We would like to thank everyone who attended. Just a reminder that the next webinar in the end-to-end series is Turning Security from a Project into a Process with Michael Joseph. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Again, this is Sherri Davidoff, CEO of LMG Security. If you have any questions, please reach out anytime. We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at info@lmgsecurity.com or find us on LinkedIn and follow us on Twitter. Thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you next time.